Welcome to Fried Brain Science. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Fry. Last week we spoke about the top 10 venomous animals, and today we'll be talking about 10 fascinating events involving radiation. Please like and subscribe, and let's get started. Number 1 is Marie Curie. Marie Curie conducted pioneering research on radioactive elements such as uranium, polonium, and radium. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the first person and the only woman to win the Nobel Prize twice, and the only person to win the Nobel Prize in two different scientific fields. But she's also a tragic case of learning the hard way. Curie died of aplastic anemia from damage to her bone marrow because of exposure to radiation during her scientific research and X-ray medical work at field hospitals during World War I. We simply didn't know then what we know now about the dangers of such radioactive exposure, and a lot of what we know is actually stimulated by her tragic case. So she was not only a pioneer in her field, but also became a cautionary tale about the dangers of radiation. But such lessons were slow to penetrate, which brings us to number 2. The use of radioactive substances as health supplements for use in nutritional studies and even in jewelry. Radium, along with thorium, were used in skin products in the 1930s to give your skin that glow. Luckily, the amounts used were too low to cause lasting or severe damage. However, an incredibly nefarious use of radiation in health studies occurred over a several-year period in the late 1940s to early 1950s. Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Quaker Oats conspired to conduct experiments on unsuspecting boys who were institutionalized children. They were tested using radiation to trace how the body absorbs calcium in order to better improve cereals. As part of the study, the boys were fed oatmeal and milk, laced with radioactive iron and calcium. In other experiments, scientists directly injected the boys with radioactive calcium. The boys did not find out about it until decades later, in 1993, leading to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit settled in 1998. Number 3. The Radium Girls, a particularly tragic chapter in the history of radiation. A century ago, glow-in-the-dark watches were an irresistible novelty. The dials, covered in a special luminescent paint, contained a radioactive element, so they shone all the time and didn't require charging in the sunlight. It was like magic. Women were hired to hand paint the dials with radioactive paint. The first death occurred in 1922 when 22-year-old Molly Maggia died after reporting a year of excruciating pain. Her entire lower jawbone had become so brittle that her doctor removed it simply by lifting it out. The radium was literally drilling holes in the women's bones. They were even encouraged to lick the paintbrushes to give them a nice sharp tip, so their exposure was tremendous. Thousands of women were affected. As radium has a very long half-life, they continued to suffer for the rest of their lives, many developing cancer decades later. Number 4 is the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant disaster. On March 28, 1979, mechanical failures in a non-nuclear secondary system were followed by a stuck-open pilot-operated relief valve in the primary nuclear system. This allowed large amounts of reactor coolant to escape. Plant operators initially failed to recognize the loss of coolant, resulting in a partial nuclear meltdown. The reactor was ultimately brought under control, but not before large amounts of radioactive gases were released into the atmosphere. It was largely only through sheer luck that a complete meltdown was avoided. This led to much more stringent regulations and precipitated the decline of the nuclear power industry in the US. Ironically, this incident happened only 12 days after the release of the movie masterpiece, The China Syndrome, which was about a nuclear accident caused by a faulty pressure gauge and human error. The nuclear power industry reacted violently to the movie, claiming it was total fiction, nothing like that could ever happen in reality, and that it was a character assassination of an entire industry. Yeah, go figure. Number 5, Chernobyl. On April 26, 1986, at the Ukrainian Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a routine test on reactor number 4 went out of control, triggering a nuclear meltdown. The ensuing steam explosion and fire immediately killed 50 people, but it's estimated several 100,000 more died over time due to cancer linked to the radiation. Nuclear fallout could be detected as far away as Canada. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, covering portions of Belarus and the Ukraine, particularly the city in which the reactor was located, remained contaminated and largely uninhabited. The city itself was totally evacuated and remains a ghost town. Number 6 is Fukushima, Japan. On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 earthquake unleashed a devastating tsunami. 15,000 to 20,000 people were dead or missing. It also destroyed the Fukushima nuclear power plant, triggering explosions and the meltdown of 3 of the plant's 6 reactors. The Tokyo Electric Power Company initially downplayed the seriousness of the damage, delaying until May the disclosure of the reactor meltdowns. Problems continue to this day, such as Japan wants to release over 1 million tons of radioactive water from Fukushima into the ocean, which will contaminate the food chain and probably destroy the local fishing industry. Number 7 is long-term problems at nuclear weapons testing sites, particularly places like the Marshall Islands. Tests there included nuclear bombs that were up to 1,000 times the size of those dropped on Japan in World War II. 4 islands were completely vaporized by the destructive tests. Runit Island is probably the most acute of the Marshall Island issues for the remaining islands. It contains a massive concrete dome that stands beside a giant bomb crater. The dome contains 85,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste, which has a 24,000-year half-life. The concrete dome was constructed in the 1970s as a temporary measure. It has no concrete lining under it, so contamination is leaking into the permeable soil. Also, rising sea levels due to climate change means water has started to enter the dome and therefore radioactive material leaking out. The dome is cracking and the repair work by the US has been delayed. Number 8 is the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in November 2006. He was a Russian defector and former officer of the Russian Federal Security Services. He was assassinated in London with radioactive polonium. On his deathbed, he named Putin as the man behind his poisoning. An inquest by the UK government concluded that the Russian agents were responsible, and this represents an ominous landmark, the beginning of an era of nuclear terrorism. Number 9 is the World War II bombing by the US of the Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In this event, fission bombs were used that produced lethal rays but leave buildings intact. This led to flash burns and radiation effects on people, with an estimated 200,000 people dying. Many more dying over the coming years from cancer, as well as the survivors reporting birth defects in their children. Number 10, dirty bombs. This is when radioactive material is dispersed by a conventional bomb. They pose a clear and present danger. Indeed, they are the most dire current nuclear threat since they don't require any form of sophisticated technology, just some radioactive material and a big boom. They pose extreme medical challenges and risks to the attending personnel because they're trying to surgically remove shrapnel from the victims that is radioactive. They also have the long-term effect of spreading radioactivity over large areas, leaving them uninhabitable. Thus concludes our top 10 events involving radiation. Thank you for staying with us till the end. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe, and join us next week for the top 10 poisonous animals.